Hello, everybody. Let's start this explanation by exploring the role of age. Age plays an interesting role when it comes to second language acquisitions because it helps us to understand what are the difference between young learners and older learners. First of all, we have the young learners. They do better in natural and informal situations. They are not afraid to speak the target language. In addition to that, they receive simple language that helps them to understand. For example, we have a child from Colombia who is 6 years old, and he moves to the United States where he has to play with children who speak English. And he will learn that language quickly because he is able to memorize short phrases like "let's play" or "come here." Needless to say that he can also learn by imitating the sounds, pronunciation, and intonations. On the other hand, we have the older learners. They often do better in formal learning situations because they already have more knowledge, experience, and strong thinking skills. For example, we have a man who is 35-year old and he is in an English class, and he is good at learning grammar rules so quickly because he can read and analyze better the information from tests, blogs, etc. That's why we can conclude that adults can complete tasks like writing emails or filling out forms faster than children. In conclusion, children learn a second language naturally through play and daily life. However, adults learn a second language through rules and structured lessons.
The critical period hypothesis, proposed by Eric Langenberg in 1967, posits that there is an optimal biological window during childhood and adolescence in which the human brain is especially primed to acquire languages naturally and more easily to do high brain plasticity. According to this hypothesis, the critical period spans approximately from age 2 to puberty, 13 years old. During this time, the brain's mechanisms for language learning are much more flexible and receptive. After puberty, brain's plasticity declines and learning a second language becomes more difficult, especially in aspects such as pronunciation and native grammar. People who learn a second language after the critical period tend to exhibit a strong foreign accent and may have more difficult achieve native like proficiency. For example, as 7 years old students move to the US and begins to learn English at school. In less than a year, she speaks English fluently and almost without an answer. Her 35 years old mother also takes classes, but struggles to pronounce words correctly and remember certain grammatical structures. This illustrates that critical period hypothesis, in this case, the student's brains due to her age, is in the optimal phase for acquiring a second language naturally. While for her mother, learning is slower and requires more effort. Therefore, we could say that there is an ideal age for learning a second language, and that doing so after that period can be much more challenging, especially in achieve pronunciation and proficiency similar to that of a native speakers. Thanks.
Hello everyone. Today I'm going to explain how the critical period influence second language learning. And first, the critical period hypothesis states that there is a stage in childhood when our brain is especially ready to learn language. During this time, our neural plasticity is very high. In simple words, the brain is more flexible and It creates new connection much more easily. Because of this, children can learn a second language in a very natural way. They usually develop better pronunciation, more intuitive grammar, and faster language processing. That's why young learners often sound more native like compared to adults. However, this ability doesn't disappear completely. What happens is that as we grow older, our brain becomes less flexible. Adults can definitely learn another language, and any do so very successfully. But the process tends to require more efforts, more conscious study, and more practice. Also, adults usually keep a stronger accent and may take longer to master certain structures. So, in conclusion, the critical period doesn't stop anyone from learning a second language. What it does is influence how easily and how naturally the language can be acquired. Early exposure brings an advantage, but motivate adults can also achieve high levels and competence with the right strategies. Thank you so much.
Okay, now I will talk about the differences between the male and female. In this complex process, there are many opinions about the learning between these sex. Some people think that men learn faster, especially in Western cultures, but researchers don't always say the same. There are some biological differences that can affect the learning. For example, Kimura says that the man's brain be more asymmetrically organized for the speech. Also, Harper found that the male can be better at using the grammar rules. However, the language learning it's not only about the biology. The social factors also can influence how they learn. Fury says that the gender is related to opportunities for the interaction and social identity. For example, some girls have more chance to practice the language in the daily life, and this helps to their process, to the learning process. To include the males and females may show differences trended in language learning, but studies have mixed results. Both can learn a second language successfully, depending on the biological and social factors.
I am going to talk about the motivation in the second language acquisition. According to Savage Troiken, motivation determines the level of effort students invest in developing their second language. In other words, the more motivated students, the more they practice, participate, and engage in language learning, which usually leads to greater proficiency. Traditionally, Gardner described two main types of motivation, integrative and instrumental, but later reorganized them into intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is when we learn a language because we find the process enjoyable or meaningful. For example, a student who studies English because they love the culture, the music, the language, etc. Ryan and the Sea explain that intrinsic motivation comes from doing something because it is interesting or satisfying. And Magis research found that the stronger intrinsic motivation leads to better results and greater confidence. On the other hand, extrinsic or instrumental motivation comes from external reasons. These include improved job opportunities, passing an exam, gaining prestige, or accessing academic information. Many adults learning have this type of motivation because English opens opening doors towards travel and education. According to research, neither type is optimally better, as success depends on personal and social factors. However, interest and motivation tends to promote long-term learning and greater commitment. It is important to mention that teachers also play a key role. When the teacher creates a relaxed and supportive environment in the classroom, students feel more motivated. As Algami points out, positive teacher-student relationships can increase interest in motivation and improves performance. In conclusion, motivation is a central factor in second language acquisition as it influences the effort students put in their progress in learning a second language. Thank you.